Lebanon faces a severe humanitarian crisis amid intensified Israeli military actions, with over 3,000 casualties and nearly 13,500 injured. About 1.2 million people are displaced, straining shelters and resources as food and medical supplies run low. Regions like Baalbek and the Beqa Valley endure relentless strikes, and local authorities and aid groups are urgently calling for international support to ease the growing suffering of the Lebanese civilians.
كل المستهدفين هن مدنيين.
الوضع شيء مرعب، شيء بخوف.
A massive fire broke out in Beirut's Al Hamra neighborhood, engulfing more than a dozen cars in a parking lot and damaging a nearby building. Lebanese authorities reported that a power generator explosion triggered a series of blasts, though the exact cause of the fire remains under investigation. Civil defense team swiftly arrived at the scene as thick black smoke billowed into the sky, prompting the evacuation of nearby buildings. Lebanese media have reported that at least 11 intense airstrikes targeted Beirut's southern suburbs overnight following an Israeli assault. An airstrike on Burj al-Barjna caused a loud explosion heard across the city as it filled the sky with thick black smoke that spread into nearby areas. Additional strikes reportedly hit neighborhoods, including Haret Hareik and Hadath. The Israeli military claimed the attacks targeted Hezbollah positions. Iranian Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi has warned that the Israeli wars in Gaza and Lebanon could spill over beyond the Middle East. Araghchi warned in a speech aired on state TV against the expansion of the war. He said that the harmful effects won't be confined to the West Asia region and that instability could spread to distant areas as well. And joining us now from Beirut is Dr. Issam Sharafuddin, the Lebanese caretaker minister of the displaced. Minister Sharafuddin, thank you so much for being with us on Qnews.
Thank you so much.
Mr. Sharafuddin, can you briefly outline Lebanon's displacement crisis and its impact on the civilians?
In fact, because of the violent assaults and attacks that are systematic and barbarous by the Israeli enemy, around 1,500,000 persons got displaced from the south and from the Dahia, the suburbs, and from the northern valley, and from Baalbek as well. 200,000 of which are actually Syrian displaced that resorted to the south, and most of the rest went back to Syria. And it is, in fact, interesting that Syria received 162,000 displaced persons and consider them guests, which actually is synchronized with the return of 400,000 displaced persons back to Syria. And this, in fact, attests to the fact that voluntary return is still being welcomed by the Syrian government. And, you know, all the allegations claimed by international organizations and the UNHCR and the European states and the United States, you know, claiming that Syria is not welcoming these returnees. All these claims are false. In fact, returns and voluntary returns are being facilitated and welcomed by Syria. In fact, internally displaced persons, there are now 1,200,000 persons, are now distributed across a lot of hosting centers. And in fact, the rest of the displaced persons are now being hosted in Lebanese households, which attests to national consolidation and solidarity in this tight circumstance.
Indeed, as you said respectively, here over 1 million displaced, 1,300,000 as you respectively said. How is the government addressing the urgent shelter need, and what challenges does the scale of displacement impose on your government?
In fact, you know, the war broke out around 1 year ago because, and we, of course, expected a lot of escalation to take place because we're dealing with a completely immoral enemy. And so we formed 10 emergency committees to manage and regularize the tight war circumstances. And so when these attacks of Israel got escalated and a lot of the southern areas got demolished and raided with internationally prohibited arms, we had to open around 1,050 formal schools in order to utilize them as hosting centers for the displaced persons. And after that, you know, the displaced persons got scattered across all governorates and, of course, households in these governorates, in addition to the hosting centers. You know, of course, there are livelihood matters such as, you know, the basic needs like heating and furnishing needs and food needs of these individuals. That was something that we had to provide for these displaced persons. And as you all know, Lebanese nationals are actually caught in strenuous case of poverty right now, and we have limited resources, so that really put a toll on the government.
Indeed. So, Your Excellency, how are you addressing the severe shortage of the food, water and medical supplies and care? And how crucial is the international community's support at this very precise time?
In fact, we of course wished of the international community to help us terminate and stop the war, because you know, all the skirmishes happening at the south do not or are not commensurate with this collective genocide that is taking place in the south. In fact, right now we are having a lot of aid coming from a lot of countries. You know, the Paris conference granted us $800 million appropriated for emergency humanitarian cases. And in fact, we asked of the UNRWA around $450,000, only 80,000 came. to us. In fact, as well, Emirates, Saudi Arabia, Egypt, Turkey, Pakistan, all these countries sent in-kind aids. And Jordan as well helped us a lot. You know, we don't have persons dying of hunger in Lebanese, thank God, but of course, we have a lot of needs in terms of providing heating for these individuals that are displaced. We need to provide them with systems of central heating. In fact, the state in Lebanon is trying to appropriate some funds in order to protect the dignity of the displaced persons until they return to their countries and places of origin.
Your Excellency, here, how has the damage of the healthcare facilities affect Lebanon's medical infrastructure and the ability for care for those injured?
In fact, of course, all this damage, I'm pretty sure the Israelis are going to bear. In fact, we are asking for $1 million compensation for all the humanitarian damage and all the amenity damage that took place. Because, you know, Israel wouldn't have had the guts to carry out all this damage if it wasn't for the indefinite support coming from the United States, which actually claims to protect human rights.
With only 21% of the needed humanitarian funds raised so far, how is that affecting relief efforts, and what is your message here to the international community at large?
First
of all, to lift the economic siege and barricade from Lebanon. And in fact, the expert Chote said that the Caesar law in Syria is an American, a Western American decision, and that the barricade and siege over Lebanon needs to be lifted right away. They want to break us and break our spirits, but this is never going to happen.
Now, Prime Minister Miqati warned of historic levels of displacement. What long-term impact could this have on Lebanon, and how is the government prepared or preparing for that? No, we're speaking here about the Prime Minister's warnings of the high level of displacement or of displaced people in Lebanon, and that it has raised to a historic level. So the question is, how are you preparing for that?
Displacement already happened. You know, there is, you know, the Dahi or the suburb is now completely void of persons. There was an idea proposed for us to establish like plastic temporary houses until reconstruction operations take place. And here comes the role of those who couldn't help us with military aid. Here comes the role as France to actually help us by, you know, providing some funds appropriated for reconstruction of the demolished buildings.
Well, thank you so much, Dr.
شكراً
Sharafuddin,
جزيلاً.
for your insights and commitment to helping Lebanon's displaced communities. And we hope the international community would really respond swiftly to provide the necessary support. We appreciate your time with us, and many thanks for being here. Tensions continue to mount along Lebanon's southern border as Israeli airstrikes target sites in the country's south, sparking a fierce response from Hezbollah.
Lebanon remains tense as escalating hostilities with Israel raise concerns for civilian safety along the border. Overnight, Israeli airstrikes targeted multiple sites in southern Lebanon, reportedly striking Hezbollah infrastructure around the towns of Marun al-Ras and Aitaron. The Lebanese army confirmed that drones and artillery were involved, adding that it is closely monitoring developments. In response, Hezbollah heavy significant shelling against Israeli occupation military outposts, marking one of the conflict's sharpest escalations. The exchanges underscore the bolstered Israeli military presence along Lebanon's southern border, fueling fears of a wider confrontation that could deepen Lebanon's involvement in the regional conflict. The humanitarian situation in southern Lebanon is worsening, with thousands displaced and border hospitals facing critical shortages as they struggle to care for the increasing number of injured. Local organizations warn of an impending humanitarian crisis if violence persists. In Beirut, Lebanese officials have appealed to the United Nations and the international community for intervention, calling for an immediate ceasefire and protections for civilians. As events unfold, Lebanese citizens brace for potential escalation, hoping that diplomatic efforts will restore calm before the conflict intensifies further.
As Israel's military assault on Gaza intensifies, more lives are lost, and experts warn of an imminent famine in the besieged region. With the UN condemning Israel's actions and calls for urgent aid growing, the Middle East braces for a broader regional spillover. Amid rising global pressure, the clock ticks towards a potential humanitarian catastrophe. Moving on to the latest developments in Gaza. At least 14 Palestinians have been killed and others have been injured in Israeli shelling of Gaza cities and Qnews since last night. Palestinian media reports indicate that the Israeli occupation forces targeted a school sheltering displaced people on Java Street in Gaza City, killing 5 people. Additional strikes hit tents in Qnews where more displaced individuals reside. At least 11 Palestinians have been killed and several others have been injured in the Israeli bombing of the Shuja'iyya neighborhood east of Gaza City. Palestinian media reported that Israeli artillery also shelled Beit Hanun in the northeast of the Gaza Strip and raided a building in the Shabura camp in Rafah, in the south. Israeli occupation forces have carried out 4 massacres in the Gaza Strip over the past 48 hours, leaving at least 44 Palestinians dead and 81 others injured. Gaza health authorities confirmed that the death toll from the Israeli onslaught since October 7th has surpassed 43,550, with more than 102,760 people wounded. The Washington Post has reported that experts warn of an imminent famine in northern Gaza as Israel's military offensive intensifies. A UN-affiliated panel has raised alarms, confirming that worst-case scenarios are rapidly unfolding, with starvation, malnutrition, and excess mortality now on the rise. The situation has reached critical levels, with over 20% of households facing extreme food shortages and 30% of children under 5 suffering from acute malnutrition. Urgent action is required within days to prevent further escalation and catastrophic loss of life. In response, Israel is delaying opening additional aid crossings, but uncertainty remains about whether this will provide relief to the most affected northern regions. The international community's pressure on Israel grows amid mounting humanitarian concerns. Providing more analysis regarding the current updates about the latest escalations in the Middle East, joining us from Deir al-Balah is Dr. Khalil Ad-Dukran, the Health Ministry spokesman in Gaza. Welcome to you, sir. Hello. Dr. Khalil? Right. Dr. Khalil, the Gaza Health Ministry has reported over 43,500 casualties. How has the ongoing siege impacted the healthcare system's ability to provide treatment amid severe shortages of medical supplies and equipment?
نعم جيش الاحتلال منذ 400 يوم يعني
for more than 400 days, for over a year, the Israeli enemy has been targeting civilians and hospitals and medical centers. In Gaza, in fact, we have a ton of injured individuals, and the death toll is ever increasing, and the Israelis keep on attacking the health system and hospitals in a lot of places in Gaza. In fact, they have bombarded 42 hospitals, and in fact, the hospitals are facing a dire situation because the Israelis are sieging a lot of areas in which these hospitals are located. And so these hospitals now do not have any medical supplies or fuel. And right now the IDF is besieging hospitals and has been for 35 days preventing the entry of food and medical supplies to hospitals, and even fresh water is being prevented from entry to hospitals. And right now we have a lot of hospitals coming out of the system of healthcare in Gaza, and a lot of ambulances as well cannot cater for the needs of the injured because of the IDF siege over hospitals, and the system of civil protection as well has been disrupted. And now we have for 35 days we have now 3,000 injuries and around 2,500 persons who have died because of the termination and the disruption of medical services.
Now, sir, with the Israeli blockade tightening and food scarcity worsening, the UN has warned of an imminent famine in northern Gaza. What measure is the Health Ministry taking to prepare for this crisis, and how can the international aid be effectively mobilized under these conditions?
اولا بالنسبه للوضع بشكل عام في قطاع غزه
Regarding the situation in Gaza after the corridors have been closed off and aids have been prevented from entry. In fact, we have a catastrophe in Gaza, specifically in the north. There is an imminent famine because a lot of individuals there don't have access to a single loaf of bread because the complete siege and barricade over Gaza carried out by the IDF. In fact, even infant milk is being prevented from entry. Right now, persons are eating grass out of the ground, and infants don't have access to formula milk. And this attests to the barbarity of the IDF, since they aim to starve our people in Gaza. You know, ever since this barricade started out, we've been calling on the WHO and other international organizations to help in restoring healthcare system in Gaza.
We do understand, Dr. Khalil Al-Dukran. We are aware of the dire situation is in Gaza here. Dr. Khalil Dukran, the spokesman for the Ministry of Health in Gaza, we thank you so much for being with us. And that brings us to the end of our special coverage. Don't forget to follow Qnews on YouTube, Facebook, X, Instagram, and TikTok at Qnews EGY to stay informed. For real-time updates, connect with us on the UMS digital platform. Watch it. Thanks for watching and stay tuned for more updates on Qnews.